Alex Brightman, you absolute fucking madman. Hazbin Hotel is a fine show. 6 out of 10. There. Now everybody should be appropriately angry before I get to the meat of the video. It's got tons of good and tons of bad, but more good than bad. I'm gonna get this out of the way beforehand, but I really don't care if you think this show is the best thing ever or the cringiest piece of shit to exist, because it's my video, baby! The standards I use are the same as always, based on internal consistency and narrative cohesion, never covering my personal emotional response unless I make it abundantly clear that it's a subjective point, since my subjective interests have no bearing on the writing quality and shouldn't matter to you beyond passing curiosity. I'm here to explain why the show is decently written, not my personal vibes like the rest of the vapid cesspool of YouTube. You know what? Let's discuss that, because never in my life have I seen this level of controversy over something so mediocre. I know there will be people who jump to the conclusion that I think this is the greatest show ever, and as such, my opinions can, I guess, be discarded, hence why I opened my video the way I did. I can't pretend like I'm some kind of expert in media discussion. I'm just a guy who thought long and hard about my standards before speaking, and I encourage others to do the same. You don't have to love or hate Hazbin Hotel. It does not matter. You should ideally be able to admit when a written work does good or bad. Of course, there's nothing wrong with missing context or bits of information that are crucial for the story to function and, in turn, incorrectly saying that a story is bad. I've done that exact thing many times. Once upon a time, I thought that At World's End was a bad movie. Then I did this crazy thing called rewatching it, and I found that it was better than I originally thought.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device in which...
And with that being said, if you're somebody who watched Hazbin Hotel and you don't think it's good, but you also don't care enough to engage in the discourse and rewatch the show, cool beans. This video isn't meant to mock anybody for not caring about it. This video is meant to mock those people. You know the kinds. They usually start their video with some kind of vapid pseudo-criticism. It's too cringe, it's rushed, it's not funny, I didn't like the music. Notice the pattern? They're all based on subjective emotional responses and not anything materially provable. I implore anybody to figure out how to mathematically calculate if a story is rushed or not. How could you figure out where the line where good and bad pacing is? This isn't to say that pacing as a general concept doesn't exist, but instead to say that it shouldn't be used as any form of smoking gun argument, considering that it's basically step number 1 on the path to find the actual problems that are provable. Saying the show is rushed is an entirely different argument from there are contrivances that the show has that fly in the face of established information that exists only to facilitate unnatural outcomes without the proper groundwork, even if they can technically describe the same idea. Couple this with a general lack of care when it comes to writing criticism, and the internet gives everyone a false sense of expertise in topics that they very likely have zero practical experience with offline, and throw in how this is guaranteed to be a super popular series since the pilot went viral, and we've got ourselves a recipe for one of the most bloated media bandwagons of the last decade.
This show is absolute demonic propaganda.
But when your general audience of the show is like below the age of 13, then I do think it's important for you to have good representation.
But there's one problem. I don't like Vivian Medrano. She makes bad shows, she's annoying, and worst of all, she can't handle criticism.
It is 100% expected of you to have watched this pilot before you watch the show proper.
The interactions in the show are completely predictable and derivative of other things. The show in general is very juvenile, seemingly repurposing scripts from kids' animated shows, and then just adding the words fuck a bunch of times.
Do you see what I mean? This type of shit being normalized only brings the quality of discussion down, and none of these people realize that they're part of the problem for not approaching this field with any greater care. Years ago, I made videos responding to Nostalgia Critic's Pirates of the Caribbean reviews, and I think my audience is pretty familiar with those. The general thesis is that you can't use subjective reasoning as support for an objective argument. Fundamentally, as forms of discussion, they are entirely incompatible. They're both totally valid, but they can't be conflated. Now, I took those videos down because I didn't want my channel to be perpetually seen as a reply girl for the Nostalgia Critic. Those videos were only made because he happened to have a Pirates of the Caribbean series he was releasing, and I thought it'd be a perfect case study for why people falsely think those movies are bad. Some people obviously took things too far and started wishing ill on Doug Walker, and if anyone harasses creators mentioned here, then I will personally come to your house and skin you like the animal you are. And I know that videos like mine are pointless and totally undoing the damage these pseudo-critics have done to writing discussion. That's a fruitless endeavor. but I make these to do what I can to hopefully give other people who think similar to me a voice in this weird-ass collective of human insanity we call the internet, but also to encourage the next batch of creators to be better than those that came before. And money, I like money. But in the same vein of expecting people to put more thought into their criticisms, I also expect people to put more thought into their defenses. If you think about a criticism or praise for a piece of writing from every possible angle, you should ideally be able to back up your stances without making shit up or resorting to the cowardly, "it's just my opinion" defense. I've seen that far too often for one lifetime. An opinion isn't valid by virtue of simply having one. Like, if we can just make shit up and defend claims like that, then it's my opinion that Kermit the Frog is the son of Indiana Jones and Pizza the Hut. An opinion should be backed by facts and evidence if you want them to be taken seriously, free of fallacies and able to be supported from any angle. So if you catch flack for your stances, either back them up with these things called reasons, or don't engage. No one is entitled to say nonsensical shit without any pushback. If you have the right to an opinion, everyone else has the right to criticize it. Rant over. So the show itself is kinda just alright. A solid mix of brilliance and stupidity. Great character work and a pretty broken plot. So in the spirit of being nice, I'd like to get the negatives out of the way first, since it'll probably take longer to cover that portion. I also need to preface that I haven't seen its sister show, Hell of a Boss, so it won't be covered here in any capacity. The world building of the show predates Hell of a Boss, so for the purposes of evaluating the quality of this show for the world building and story it tells, everything else isn't relevant. Hazbin Hotel is set in hell, a realm separate from heaven and earth, housing sinners. No, not the best movie of the year, and you can all fucking fight me on that, but human souls who committed sins during their time alive, and are thus denied entry into heaven. And within the first few minutes of the show, we're getting narration by the protagonist of the series, Charlie Morningstar, and the origins of the three worlds and the important players that we'll be seeing through the show: Adam, Lilith, and Lucifer. Beyond that, there are no other major players tied to real-world religion, aside from a brief cameo by St. Peter of Christianity, but they only really use his name and nothing else. I'm bringing this all up in part to quickly dispel the umbrage that many religious people have with the series. No disrespect to the religious folks out there, but the series is not meant to criticize or broadly cover any one religion. I get that religion can be very important for many, but with a show that's so broad with its usage of concepts shared by multiple highly popular, globally practiced religions, you can extend a bit of charity if the show doesn't align with your specific religion.
This show is absolute demonic propaganda.
It's like Hercules. That movie is the furthest thing from an accurate portrayal of Greek mythology, but the usage of Greek myths begins and ends with the setting for characters who are effectively original creations by the writers that share surface-level detail with their mythologized counterparts. Adam in the show is only based on the circumstances of the first man in the world, not the specific minutiae of how this figure was portrayed in sacred texts. Lilith in the show is vaguely based on the lore surrounding Lilith of Jewish folklore, but she's set to be her own character. Lucifer in this show isn't anything like his mythological counterpart whatsoever. The premise alone should be taken and run with, regardless of your external, out-of-universe personal views. That's the basis of objective media discussion. And on the topic of the opening of the show, having Charlie narrate her backstory is a pretty solid way of introducing the lore of the series, until you realize that she's telling this story that she already knows to herself. Now, this isn't an issue per se, it's more of a weird incongruity that I can imagine most don't pick up consciously, but others might subconsciously know something is off. And given that this is the literal first part of the story as an introduction, it's kinda messy. Through this, we're able to learn about Charlie's lingering familial issues. We begin to learn about her girlfriend Vaggie and her never-ending support for Charlie, and we're introduced to the cast proper. All of the introductions are handled pretty well. We learn about Charlie opening a hotel to redeem sinners so they can go to heaven, so they can avoid yearly purges, and through that, we're getting into the inciting incident of the show. Lucifer managed to arrange a meeting between Charlie and Adam. From here, the episode is split between an A plot and B plot, which is something most of the episodes of the show does. But at the same time, the actual amount of plot that happens per episode is pretty thin, with each episode almost functioning as a few scenes in a larger movie. Due to that fact, I can't really give an episode-by-episode breakdown in the traditional sense, but I'll explain as best I can how each subplot operates. Charlie has her first musical number, where she explains her perspective on life and does a hefty bit of world building. And the B-plot has Vaggie making a commercial for the hotel with the help of Alistair. Charlie meets with Adam, and it's revealed that he's a sociopathic fuckboy who likes killing sinners for entertainment. The episode ends with Charlie returning to the hotel, learning her friends made a new commercial, and the news of the expedited countdown to extermination becoming public knowledge, and Adam shutting down Lute's suggestion of killing all sinners right away by saying that they can't risk them catching on, which I'll get to later. Episode 2 was our introduction to the V's, a group of overlords that Alistair has a rivalry with. To try and get the upper hand over Alistair, they send Sir Pentious to stay at the hotel, but that fails pretty badly. The third episode is about expanding the lore of the overlords and allegedly testing Vaggy's character, which I will get to later. And the fourth episode is a character study for Angel Dust and explores his life as a porn star and has him become close friends with Husk. The first 4 episodes are structured like a sitcom, where the intro is completely disconnected from the ending of the previous episode. This isn't necessarily a bad thing on its own, plenty of great shows do that. What is an issue is how they all of a sudden jump from sitcom-style intros to a full serialized format, with episode 5 being right before the next extermination, after a time skip from the previous episodes, and that time skip isn't even addressed, so Charlie calls her father Lucifer to get his help with sending her to heaven to meet the angels directly. The 6th episode covers the meeting and how it goes horribly wrong, with the revelation that Vaggy is an angel, which, again, I will get to later. The 7th episode covers the aftermath of the meeting and has Vaggy and Charlie go on their own missions to get weapons and soldiers to help defend the hotel against the angels, having a reunion in the end, and the 8th episode is the final battle against the angels, Sir Pentious' death, and Lucifer saving Charlie from Adam, and teasing the 2nd season, of course. The general plot of a ticking clock before a mass culling is pretty solid. The world building is pretty cool, featuring overlords of hell that own souls of others, the most influential being the V's, which are all pretty robust characters that bounce off each other pretty well. Alistair is also an overlord, being a deceptively dangerous character in spite of being seen as an ally by the main characters. There's also an overlord named Carmilla, which... we've run into the biggest issue of the show. See, angels can't be killed by anything, except angelic weapons. They set up in the first episode that Lute and Adam are aware that demons managed to kill one of their own, and for some reason, Adam elected to not go down and have another extermination like Lute suggests, on the grounds of them catching on. Not sure what he expects sinners to do against a whole army arriving so quickly that they don't have time to prepare, nor do I understand how Adam and the other exorcists don't understand that their own weapons can kill them. Demons know that they can't really die normally, as evidenced by Velvet's dialogue in this scene.
But he tore up my best motto, and you know the show can't wait for that unlucky bitch to pull herself back together.
So if it's possible for demons to come back from death, with the only permanent way to die being through angelic weaponry, then technically there's no difference between angels and demons in this universe from a physiology perspective. They can survive the same things and be killed in the same ways. And we even have evidence for angels suffering grievous harm from their own weapons, at the very least, when they reveal that Vaggy was an angel. So if that's the case, how the fuck doesn't Adam automatically know how one of his own was killed? I also don't buy that someone who's characterized to be super full of himself wouldn't disregard the risks on the grounds of thinking that he's invincible, which is only further cemented by how he relishes in the attempted extermination at the end of the season. If he's apparently too concerned about what the demons could do to the point of not eradicating the threat entirely, then why even try an extermination in 6 months? And why would he telegraph his first target if there's some kind of risk of sinners fighting back? Also, on the note of angelic weapons, they're actually unnecessary. Yes, I'm serious. You can cut their unique soul-killing properties from the story, and we'd actually have a pound-for-pound better story. Angelic weapons killing demons are the central focus of 3 episodes. Episodes 3, 7, and 8. In episode 3, we're introduced to Carmilla, and we don't know how she managed to kill an angel per se, and that's revealed in episode 7. What I find weird is how both episodes try to make Carmilla a thematic parallel to Vaggy, giving them 2 musical numbers together and having Carmilla help her in the end. I find this pretty odd since they don't meet each other until the end of the season, and they basically have nothing in common beyond having people that they love, which isn't at all a unique thing among people. But what if we just made a few changes to the world building? Maybe instead of angels being invincible, they're just very strong. So strong that an individual demon attacking would be a suicide mission. Maybe we could even establish overlords as some of the few demons that stand a chance against an angel. So, getting the help of Carmilla wouldn't just be getting her weapons, but asking for her physical help in the conflict. Also, another change I'd make to go with this is outright not having Vaggy being a former angel. I know this one is bound to piss people off, but hear me out. Vaggy's angelic background is, quite literally, only relevant for 2 episodes. Episode 6 when they go to heaven since Adam tries to manipulate her, and episode 7 when they have the fallout from the previous episode. But the conflict is effectively resolved by Vaggie learning that she needs to fight for love, which is a lesson she already knows and is her literal defining character trait from the start of the show. And Charlie learns an even more truncated version of that when Rosie basically says, "You two love each other, so that's all that matters." They didn't need to force this drama into the show at the last minute, and all it does is pad the runtime. Now, I know season 2 is going to delve in the ramifications of this more, but they better make it worth it or my criticism will be validated. But why not have the penultimate of the season focus on rallying the citizens of Cannibal Town for battle, and focus on the other characters this season has done an excellent job of exploring instead of sidelining them? We get all of the same outcomes with none of the annoying baggage by removing Angelic Steel and Vaggie's angelic background. One could argue that these are only a few plot holes, but unfortunately their existence facilitates a story that would otherwise be impossible if said elements were handled consistently, meaning that they can't exist in their current form without being a problem. That being said, they're also not big enough to write the show off completely as a bad piece of storytelling, because thankfully, the character writing is actually pretty good here. As I've already explained, the notion that something could be cringe or any other vapid pseudo-criticism shouldn't be treated with any inherent validity. Many people criticize the show for having cringe characters, as if that isn't the epitome of subjective reasoning, and I'd do one better and call it downright lazy reasoning. There's a lot of moving parts to any written work, and the show is no different. And such a big cast of characters that are obviously supposed to be around for a number of years in multiple seasons, it makes sense that this season would be used to lay the groundwork for future developments. And yeah, there are some characters that kinda exist just for the purpose of being funny for the sake of it. Probably the easiest one that comes to mind is Nifty. She's harmless in her existence, just a way to get cheap laughs, not necessarily good or bad. The eggs are also in this camp, but they serve a solid role early on for showcasing Alistair's manipulative persona by using them as spies. Husk exists as a figurative angel on Angel Dust's shoulder down the road, gently encouraging him to do better with his life, in spite of the figurative devil with Cherry Bomb encouraging him to revert back to his partying ways. Angel Dust is basically the spine of the entire story. He's the textbook case for what Charlie's mission is through the show, and his growth is appropriately used as an example by Charlie when she confronts the angels. These characters basically exist for the purpose of pushing him forward, and there's nothing really wrong with that so long as they're characters in their own right. And while we don't know much about Cherry Bomb since this is one season of possibly 4, we know a bunch about Husk. He's a down-to-earth guy who's able to give necessary advice when needed, but he's also perpetually grumpy because he's basically Alistair's slave. And on that note, I'd like to cover the GOAT. Alistair is an overlord who acts outside of the norm in hell. Not really like the others, being more of a creepy presence in the corner who is more interested in quietly manipulating situations than boasting about his power. We're early into the overall story, but they're setting him up as an irredeemably evil character who could, and probably will eventually, stab Charlie in the back to serve his own interests. This is an immoral world they've set up, and a protagonist that is someone who believes in the naive philosophy that anyone can be better when that's just really not the case, actually works pretty well. Alistair and the V's are all evidence that hell contains people that are kind of beyond redemption, much like how heaven has characters that are arguably demons in their own right, while also containing great people. The nuance of the show is about how one group isn't all good or bad just because of some outdated or arbitrary old doctrine, but rather because of their actions in the present. So with that theme present, they need to provide valid reasoning for how both sides could contain good and evil, and they do an excellent job of representing that through their characters. It's also kind of hard to criticize or defend characters in the first season on what's likely to be an at least 4-season streaming series using context only from this season. Some things can obviously be criticized or praised in the confines of this season, but jumping the gun and calling a character unnecessary, devoid of important information that might not exist yet, is kind of jumping the shark. I've seen people criticize Emily for being unnecessary because she's only in 2 episodes of the season. But of course, a show that's going to follow up on a story that literally requires her presence to make sense will continue to include her as a necessary part of the story. She's not necessary for the current micro-scale story being told this season, but for all we know, she could be far more important for the macro-level narrative of the entire series. I really love how in Andor, they set up Supervisor Young very early on, but they don't really delve into how important he is until multiple episodes later. Sometimes you just need to introduce something early so it doesn't come out of nowhere later. The same could be said for Lucifer. He's barely in the first season, but his presence alone looms over the show by virtue of him being the king of the world the show is set in. And they've set up that he's going to have a much bigger presence in the rest of the show. As with the V's, as with Cherry Bomb, as with Rosie, as with Lilith. Shockingly enough, a show that is designed with the intention of running for many years is probably going to introduce a ton of characters and plot lines to support that length. I've also seen my fair share of moralizing in this discourse, where people will see a thing they personally object to and treat it as an intrinsic flaw of the show. The most blatant being the portrayal of demons without an unambiguous condemnation, or seeing villainous characters like Luke's response to Adam's death and think, well, why does the show want me to feel bad for her? As if that's an even remotely coherent criticism. But I think the most obnoxious of all of these criticisms is in regards to angel dust and the portrayal of certain topics that understandably make people very uncomfortable. So if you're sensitive to topics like sexual assault or drug abuse, skip to this time code. I have no real qualifications to discuss if something is or isn't holistically offensive. That's not my place, especially in regards to the LGBTQ community or rape victims. I'm part of neither group. I'm just a random writing YouTuber who discusses character dynamics and how they work on a mechanical level. If somebody feels personally uncomfortable with Angelus' characterization or role in this story, they're entitled to that belief. I won't criticize that, nor even try to respond to that, given my monumental lack of knowledge in these topics. It just wouldn't be fair. That being said, I will criticize when people say that Angel Dust's story celebrates or excuses or otherwise shines a positive light onto sexual assault. That isn't just a benign criticism, that's a fucked up, objectively incorrect accusation that's pretty sickening to make. Like, there are people who will basically strawman a show for the purposes of making a gotcha out of what is possibly one of the least appropriate topics to grandstand on. Maybe not everybody should have the right to speak at this point. I don't even have the energy to debunk this point. I'd encourage anyone who thinks this is glorifying rape to actually watch these scenes and pay some fucking attention. Go watch this video if you need any further convincing, because I'm not going to bother with that level of idiocy. Moving on. On a lighter note, I'm going to respond to smaller criticisms that people say that don't really have extensive arguments behind them. The dialogue is cringe. Cringe is a superfluous and totally vacuous statement that is entirely determined by the audience. You might find something cringe, but that doesn't necessarily mean everyone else will. The comedy isn't funny. As if the response to comedy isn't entirely rooted in the tastes of the audience. All that matters is that the comedy is in character and rooted in what makes sense for the story. That's why jokes like this,
if you film me going at it with Mr. Fancy Talk Creepy Voice here, you'd be rolling in participants willing to stay at this tacky hotel.
Never going to happen.
Are good, while jokes like this are bad. Penchas getting dragged kicking and screaming into a sex booth is a terrible joke to make so soon after an episode where they make a sharp point of sexual assault being a bad thing. So making a joke of that is just fucking wild. The animation is too distractingly cluttered. Okay, but I have no issue understanding what's happening on screen. If you're gonna make an argument for something being bad, don't use something that can't be outright proven with objective facts. Charlie is a Mary Sue. Charlie is a loopy basket case who's barely holding herself together through the first season, having mental breakdowns and outbursts because of the pressure of the situation getting to her. She's also presented as lacking in basic pragmatism, and at the end of the season, she's not even the one to save the day. I think the Mary Sue argument can be made with other characters in different stories, but using that against a character who not only loses in the end, but spends the whole story barely keeping herself together is a weak one at best. It's bad because they portray the demons as good and the angels as bad. Treat the show like fanfiction, because that's basically what it is. This isn't supposed to be an accurate translation of religious stories like Prince of Egypt, but a musical comedy about fictionalized versions of mythologized figures. You're allowed to have fun. The reason I made this video is a pretty simple one. I like good faith media criticism. It's invaluable with how much it can help new artists, and the landscape of the entertainment industry is quickly shifting. We're seeing YouTubers become serious artists, being able to turn their dream projects into studio-backed entertainment for the masses. On some level, no matter how much you might hate the show or its creator, it's a good thing for the landscape of art. We all say we want new concepts to take off, but that doesn't happen overnight. This is a step in the right direction. An indie animator from YouTube is now the showrunner of a multi-season Amazon series with a massive Broadway cast with stories and songs that took over the internet. Not to say that this excuses the flaws whatsoever. Standards should be maintained no matter what. That's why I preach objective criticism as the best way to criticize something. It's the fairest way to criticize media since it's based on basic thresholds that all stories should be able to surpass, of which are not subject to change depending on the mood of the viewer. I'd also say that it's the most actionable form of criticism. Unlike the vacuous, "it's unfunny" or "it's boring" arguments, these are things that future writers can actually use in meaningful ways. Seriously tell me how somebody could hear a criticism claiming that the writing isn't funny and then rectify that. It's not possible to please everyone's sense of humor, but it is possible for a writer to make their work internally consistent with its plot, characters, and themes. By not being objective, you aren't saying anything worth as a critic. And if you're not saying anything of worth, why are you saying anything? The internet is a wonderful paradox that gives everyone a voice, but since there are so few people out there who actually write professionally, it's next to impossible to fully curb vapid talking points from being normalized in writing discussion. My only hope is that videos like this can encourage other people to think more critically of critics, because the critical state of media criticism needs more critics of the critics, criticizing the critical lack of criticism skills. And with that, I'm gone. Goodbye.